"You're my husband now," said the Apache girl, after the bounty hunter chose not to kill her. The sun rose slowly over the rugged plains, casting long shadows across the dry, rocky land. The frontier was a harsh place where only the strong and clever could survive. Small settlements dotted the landscape, wooden cabins surrounded by dusty paths and fences that tried and often failed to keep the wild at bay. Life was hard, simple, and unforgiving, and everyone knew that a single mistake could cost a person dearly. Among the scattered towns and homesteads, a man traveled alone. He was a bounty hunter, a figure both feared and respected in equal measure. His name was Marcus, though most people only knew him by the stories they whispered around the fire at night. He had a tall, lean frame, weathered by years under the sun and the wind, his face etched with lines that spoke of long nights and difficult choices. His eyes were sharp, always scanning the horizon for movement, always calculating danger. He carried a rifle on his back and a pair of pistols at his side, tools that had kept him alive through countless encounters with outlaws, thieves, and men who had underestimated him. Marcus had learned early in life that survival depended on being alert, quick, and decisive. Preparation. Every bounty he took, every fugitive he tracked, was a challenge to his skill and patience. He was a man who had seen the darkest parts of humanity, the greed, the desperation, the cruelty, and yet he carried a code of his own. He believed in fairness, in justice of a sort, though it was his kind of justice, swift, precise, and sometimes merciless. Far to the west, beyond the settlements and the dusty roads, lived a young Apache woman named Aylin. She was strong, quick-witted, and deeply tied to the land of her people. Aylin had grown up learning the ways of her tribe, moving silently through forests, reading the signs of animals and weather, knowing where water ran underground and how to gather food without leaving a trace. She had also learned that the outside world, the settlers, the lawmen, the bounty hunters, was unpredictable and often dangerous. Her life had taught her caution, the kind that came from understanding people could be as wild as the land itself. Aylin had a keen mind and an independent spirit. She was respected among her people for her bravery and her ability to think clearly in moments of danger. Her days were spent helping her family gather in food, and sometimes sneaking to the edges of the territories to trade with settlers for supplies her tribe could not make themselves. Life was a delicate balance, but she thrived on it, finding joy in small victories. A successful hunt, a clever trick that saved time, or a quiet evening around the fire with stories and laughter.
One morning, the paths of Marcus and Aylin were about to cross.
Marcus had been tracking a fugitive for days, a man who had committed crimes in multiple settlements. Rumors led him to a narrow canyon where the fugitive had been seen hiding. The air was dry, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the distant sound of a river flowing over rocks. Marcus moved carefully, leaving no footprints that could give away his position. His eyes were fixed on the uneven ground, reading it like a map, anticipating where danger could come from.
Aylin, meanwhile, had been gathering water from a hidden stream nearby.
She knew the area well, but she was alert, her instincts sharp. Something in the air made her pause. The sound of soft, deliberate movement, the faint shift of dust. She crouched low, peering through the brush, and spotted Marcus. At first, she thought he was one of the lawmen who sometimes patrolled near the settlements, but something about his cautious movements, the way he scanned the land, told her he was not there to protect anyone.
Their eyes met briefly as silent acknowledgement of each other's presence.
Marcus noticed her as well, though he did not move immediately. He was sizing her up, trying to understand who she was, and whether she posed a threat. There was something in her stance, in the calm alertness of her body that made him pause. She was alone, yet she seemed fearless, confident in her surroundings, aware of everything. It was rare to see such poise, and it caught his attention. For Marcus, the world of the frontier was usually black and white. There were targets, there were threats, and there were those who were simply obstacles in his path. But Island was different. She did not fit neatly into the categories he was used to. He could see that she could defend herself if needed, yet she had no weapon in hand. She was cautious but not hostile. There was a tension in the air, an unspoken question between them. What would happen if they crossed paths? Island, on her part, sensed the man was dangerous. Breaths. She had heard stories of bounty hunters who would not hesitate to kill anyone in their way, yet she also saw hesitation in him, a pause that was unusual for someone of his reputation. That hesitation, small as it was, gave her a sense of opportunity. She could move carefully, use her knowledge of the land, and perhaps avoid a confrontation that might otherwise be deadly. The two spent hours in a silent standoff, moving along parallel paths through the canyon, neither making a decisive move. Marcus tracked the fugitive, but he also kept an eye on Island, curious about her presence. Island, meanwhile, adjusted her route, using the terrain to remain unseen while observing him. Both were patient, both were skilled, and both understood that one wrong step could change everything. As the day wore on, Marcus found the signs he had been following. Broken branches, footprints in the dirt, and the faint scent of smoke where the fugitive had made a small fire. He moved quickly, approaching the spot with caution. Aylin, realizing that she might be caught in the crossfire if the bounty hunter found his target, decided to act. She stepped into the open, showing herself deliberately, hoping to communicate her intentions without words. Marcus froze for a moment, seeing her clearly for the first time. He lowered his rifle slightly but did not put it away. There was something in her eyes that told him she was not an enemy, yet she was connected to the man he sought. The air between them was heavy with tension, but also with curiosity. Marcus had spent years learning to read people, and he could tell she was clever, brave, and perhaps more dangerous than anyone he had faced with a weapon. For Island, this moment was critical. She had to decide whether to flee, hide, or risk speaking. The land around them was open, leaving little room for escape. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and chose a third option: to meet him with honesty, to show she would not run if he wanted to judge her character. There was courage in that decision, the kind that came from understanding both risk and the possibility of understanding another person. By the time the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and red, Marcus and Island had acknowledged each other without a word. The fugitive remained out of sight, but the encounter between them had already shifted something. The bounty hunter, used to seeing the world in terms of danger and reward, felt a new kind of awareness. The Apache woman, used to navigating the threats of her world with skill and instinct, realized that not all men with guns were enemies. As night fell, both found temporary shelter near the canyon's edge, separated by a short distance but aware of each other's presence. The stars appeared one by one, tiny points of light in the vast, dark sky. Marcus thought about the day's events, the unusual pause he had felt in the presence of the woman, and the strange curiosity it stirred in him. Aylin, lying under a blanket of branches and leaves, considered the man who had tracked a dangerous criminal with unmatched skill but had not yet acted against her, despite having the chance. Neither spoke, but both understood that the meeting had changed something. The frontier was still dangerous, the fugitive still at large, and the challenges of survival still lay ahead. Yet in that moment, a connection had formed between two people from very different worlds. It was a small, almost imperceptible bridge between lives shaped by harshness and courage, by instinct and experience. And so, part one ends with both Marcus and Island aware of each other, separated by circumstance but connected by a shared understanding. That the world was unpredictable, that danger was constant, and that even in the harshest places, unexpected meetings could leave a mark that neither would forget. Their story was only beginning, and the choices of the coming days would test them in ways neither could yet imagine. The next morning, the canyon woke slowly, the sunlight creeping over the rocks and painting the landscape in warm shades of gold. Marcus stirred first, stretching and checking his weapons as was his habit. The frontier taught a man never to drop his guard, and Marcus had learned that lesson well. The air was dry but cool, carrying the distant scent of sagebrush and pine. Somewhere beyond the hills, birds began their morning calls, and the river whispered softly as it flowed over stones. Aylin had already moved silently among the rocks, careful not to make a sound. She had spent years learning to move like this, lightly, without disturbing the land around her. Even though Marcus was nearby, she did not feel entirely threatened. She could sense his presence, his calm vigilance, and it made her aware that he was not a careless man. Still, she knew better than to trust appearances completely. The world of bounty hunters and lawmen was full of unpredictability. Marcus was following the signs of the fugitive he had tracked for days, carefully reading footprints, broken branches, and the faint marks left on the soil. Dame. Yet his thoughts kept drifting back to the woman he had seen the day before. There was something unusual about her. Her courage, her intelligence, and the way she seemed to understand the land as if it were part of her own body. He had spent his life studying people, learning to read intentions, and he knew that she was not ordinary. Aylin, for her part, watched him from a distance, narration. She had no weapon, yet she was not afraid. She had faced danger before, and she had survived. But there was a difference between surviving a storm or an animal and surviving a man with the rifle and pistols. She had to decide whether to stay hidden, risk confrontation, or try to communicate. Every choice carried weight, for a mistake could end her life. Yet she also sensed that Marcus had paused before, and that hesitation was not something she could ignore. As the morning wore on, the fugitive's trail became clearer. Marcus could see where the man had rested, left scraps of food, and taken water from the river. He moved cautiously, knowing that a single misstep could allow the man to escape. Aylin, meanwhile, decided to follow at a safe distance, curious about the bounty hunter who had not immediately acted against her. Her curiosity was careful, not reckless. She moved like a shadow, using the rocks and brush for cover, watching the man's skill in tracking. Hours passed in silence. The sun climbed higher, making the rocks glow in bright hues and casting deep shadows in the canyon crevices. Marcus noticed the subtle signs of movement behind him, slight disturbances in the soil and broken branches that did not belong to the fugitive. He paused, scanning the terrain, and his sharp eyes caught sight of Aylin's figure briefly before she melted back into the rocks. He did not shout or confront her. Instead, he simply nodded in acknowledgement, as if recognizing a worthy presence in the vast wilderness. Aylin felt a mix of relief and tension. She had not expected recognition, only survival. Yet the acknowledgement told her something important. Marcus was aware of her, and he respected her skill, even if he did not yet trust her. Breaths. That small, unspoken understanding created a fragile bond, one that neither could define yet, but that began to shape their interactions. By midday, the fugitive's trail led to a narrow ravine, a place where the canyon walls rose sharply on either side and the river narrowed into a rushing stream. Marcus moved with careful precision, knowing that any sudden noise could alert the man. He was focused, every sense tuned to the environment, and yet he could not ignore the presence of Aylin, who continued to follow quietly. Her movements were deliberate, her eyes always on him, studying his methods, learning his patterns. Suddenly, a distant sound broke the calm, a branch snapping underfoot. Marcus froze, raising his rifle with practiced ease. His eyes scanned the ravine, noting the movement in the shadows. It was the fugitive. The man had grown careless, thinking he could escape unnoticed. Marcus advanced cautiously, stepping over stones and keeping low to avoid detection. Aylin's heart raced. She realized that the moment of confrontation had arrived. She had to make a choice: intervene, hide, or continue observing. She crouched behind a rock, trying to control her breathing, aware that any sudden move could put her in danger. The fugitive, unaware of both the bounty hunter and the woman watching, continued along the narrow path, leaving small footprints in the dirt. Marcus followed silently, approaching the man with the skill of someone who had done this countless times. He could see the fear in the fugitive's posture, the uncertainty in his movements. Yet he also recognized the cunning of a man desperate to survive. Marcus knew that patience was key. One mistake could allow the fugitive to vanish into the canyon forever. Island watched as Marcus moved closer. She noticed the way he paused, measured his steps, and adjusted his position with the wind in his favor. She had never seen anyone move with such precision and focus. Despite the danger, she felt a strange sense of admiration. Marcus was formidable, not just because of his weapons, but because of his mind and discipline. Then something unexpected happened. The fugitive stumbled, losing balance on a loose stone. Marcus seized the opportunity, raising his rifle and taking aim. Yet just as he was about to act, Island stepped forward, calling out in a clear, strong voice. "Stop!" she shouted, and the sound echoed through the canyon. Breaths hesitated, lowering his rifle slightly. He had not expected interference, and the sudden voice startled him. The fugitive, startled by the shout, froze in place. Marcus scanned the area and saw Aylin standing firmly, her eyes meeting his. There was no fear in her expression, only determination. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but firm. He did not yet fully understand her intentions.
I will not let you kill him,
Island replied, her tone steady.
He may be guilty, but killing him here is not the way.
Marcus studied her, weighing her words.
He had spent years making split-second decisions, but something in her voice, in her courage, gave him pause. For the first time in a long while, he felt uncertainty. He could sense the humanity in her, and it challenged the rigid code he had always followed. The fugitive took the moment of hesitation to his advantage, moving quickly toward the river.
Marcus adjusted, keeping his aim, but he did not fire.
Aylin moved to intercept the man, not with force, but by positioning herself in the path where he could not escape easily.
Her strategy was clever, relying on knowledge of the terrain rather than weapons. Marcus watched closely. He realized that Aylin was not reckless. She was calculating, brave, and intelligent. He lowered his rifle, deciding to let her actions guide the situation. Together, they created an unspoken teamwork. Marcus with his skill in weaponry, Aylin with her understanding of the land and clever positioning. In the end, the fugitive, realizing escape was impossible without confrontation, surrendered quietly. Marcus moved in, securing the man without a single shot fired. He glanced at Aylin, a mixture of surprise and respect in his eyes. She had acted decisively, and it had worked. "That was clever," Marcus admitted, his voice quiet, almost a whisper.
I did not expect that, Island shrugged slightly, trying not to show her pride. Sometimes strength is not just in weapons, she said.
Sometimes it is in thinking, in knowing the land, and in knowing people. Marcus nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. For the first time, he felt that the world was larger than the narrow path he had walked for so long. This encounter had changed something in him, though he did not yet know how. Island had shown him that mercy and intelligence could be as powerful as any rifle. As evening approached, they set up a small camp near the river. The fugitive was secured and would be taken to the authorities later, but for now the moment belonged to them. Around the campfire they shared no words of personal history, but a silent understanding had grown. Marcus respected her courage. Aelin respected his restraint. The stars appeared once again, and the canyon, quiet and still, seemed to hold its breath. Both knew that the world outside would continue to challenge them, that dangers would not disappear, and that trust was fragile. Yet, something unspoken had begun between them, a connection born of respect, courage, and shared experience in a harsh, unpredictable land. Part 2 ends with the understanding that life on the frontier was unpredictable. Danger was constant. But choices, sometimes small, sometimes brave, could alter the course of events in ways neither could yet fully understand. Marcus and Aelin had met under extraordinary circumstances, and the choices of today would shape their journey in the days to come. The next few days were tense but necessary. Marcus and Aelin traveled together through the canyon and surrounding plains, following the trail that had once belonged to the fugitive. Even though the man was now secured, the journey was far from easy. The land stretched endlessly, a mixture of jagged rocks, dry grass, and occasional clusters of trees that offered both shade and hiding places.
Every step carried the possibility of danger. Wild animals, unstable terrain, or other humans with unclear intentions.
At first, Marcus and Aelin moved mostly in silence. Words were unnecessary. Their shared awareness and cautious movements spoke volumes. Marcus watched her carefully, noting how she moved with purpose, yet with the lightness of someone who knew how to avoid attention. Aelin observed him in return, intrigued by his precision, the way he handled his weapons without a hint of wasteful motion. Though their skills were different, both recognized the expertise of the other. On the third morning, they encountered a narrow gorge where the river had carved its way through the canyon wall. The path was treacherous with loose rocks and steep drops. Marcus went first, testing each step with care. Aelin followed, moving like a shadow, placing her feet lightly to avoid triggering a rock slide. Despite the danger, there was a sense of rhythm between them, an unspoken coordination born from necessity. Brash. During a brief rest near the river, Marcus finally spoke, breaking the silence. "You've handled yourself well," he said, his tone neutral but sincere. "I've seen few people move like that in the canyon. Most would have been careless, or worse." Aelin glanced at him, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I've had to learn," she replied simply. "The land teaches you if you are willing to listen." Marcus nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. He had spent years relying on his own skills and instincts, but there was a depth in her understanding that he had rarely seen. It was not just survival. It was knowledge, patience, and respect for the land and the life it sustained. The tension between them began to shift subtly, where before there had been only caution and suspicion. A sense of trust began to form. Marcus found himself considering her advice, noticing when she paused or shifted her position, and realizing that her instincts were often as reliable as his. Aelin, too, observed him carefully, noting the way he remained calm under pressure, the way he thought through each action before moving.
There was respect growing alongside curiosity, and that respect began to soften the edges of wariness.
However, the frontier was not a forgiving place.
One afternoon, as they navigated a dense thicket near the edge of the canyon, a group of outlaws appeared, clearly seeking shelter and perhaps ready for confrontation. Marcus recognized them immediately, noting the way they moved in formation, their hands close to their weapons.
He raised his hand to signal Aelin to stop, and they both crouched low, hidden among the thick brush. The outlaws passed within a few feet of their hiding spot, laughing and arguing, unaware of the danger that had slipped past them. Marcus kept his rifle ready but did not act. Aelin's heart raced, but she remained calm, trusting his judgment. After the group moved on, Marcus let out a quiet breath and gestured for them to continue. "They were dangerous, but unaware," he said. "We could have confronted them, but it would have been unwise."
Aelin nodded, impressed by his restraint. Sometimes avoiding conflict is stronger than facing it, she said.
It is clever, not weakness. The day stretched on and they found a small sheltered area near a cluster of trees to rest for the night. As they ate their meager meal, a sense of companionship began to grow. They shared stories, not of personal history, but of experiences that shaped their understanding of the world. Marcus spoke of the people he had tracked, the lessons he had learned in the wilderness, and the quiet moments of reflection that few would understand. Island shared insights about her tribe, her connection to the land, and the careful balance required to survive and protect her people. Through these conversations, Marcus began to see her as more than an obstacle or a curiosity. She was intelligent, capable, and courageous. Aelin, in turn, found herself respecting the man who had once been a stranger, who had the power to kill but chose restraint, who carried experience without arrogance. Their mutual respect became a bridge between their different worlds, forming a connection neither had expected. The next morning brought a challenge neither had anticipated. Sudden storms swept over the canyon, bringing strong winds, rain, and lightning. The narrow paths became slippery and dangerous, and the river swelled rapidly, threatening to flood the lower areas. Marcus and Aelin had to rely on each other completely to navigate the treacherous terrain. He led the way across unstable rocks, offering guidance when the footing became risky. She spotted safer routes, pointing out hidden paths through the mud and undergrowth. At one point, Aelin slipped on a slick stone, but Marcus caught her arm just in time, steadying her breath. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and in that instant, a silent understanding passed between them. The storm was a threat, but together they were stronger. Aelin realized that she could trust him with her life, and Marcus realized that he had come to rely on her instincts as much as his own experience.
By evening, the storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape washed clean and glistening.
The sun broke through the clouds, casting rainbow colors across the canyon.
Marcus and Aelin settled near the river to rest, tired but relieved.
They did not speak much, for words seemed unnecessary after the day they had survived. The quiet companionship spoke louder than conversation, and both felt a growing bond that neither could ignore. Over the next few days, the journey continued, filled with small moments that strengthened their connection. They shared tasks, gathering water, building fires, setting traps for small game, and each learned to appreciate the other's skill and judgment. Marcus admired Aelin's courage and intelligence, while Aelin valued his calm presence and decisiveness. Their interactions were careful but genuine, forming a foundation of trust that would be essential in the challenges to come. However, the frontier did not allow for complacency. One evening, as they approached a narrow pass, they encountered tracks in the dirt. Fresh tracks, indicating someone had passed through moments before. Marcus knelt to inspect them, his eyes narrowing. "We are not alone," he murmured. Aelin crouched beside him, studying the footprints. They were not animal tracks. They belonged to humans, and they carried a dangerous intent. The realization brought a mixture of caution and resolve. They had grown accustomed to relying on each other, but now that reliance was about to be tested in ways neither had fully imagined. The tracks led deeper into the canyon, toward a place where ambush was possible. Marcus and Aelin exchanged a look, a wordless agreement that they would face whatever came together. That night, under a canopy of stars, they camped cautiously, taking turns keeping watch. The bond between them had grown from mere survival into a partnership built on mutual respect and shared experience. Marcus found himself thinking of Aelin not as a stranger, but as a companion whose skills and instincts matched his own. Aelin, in turn, felt a sense of safety she had rarely known, tempered by admiration for a man who had shown restraint, courage, and intelligence in equal measure. As dawn approached, they prepared to continue their journey. The canyon stretched before them, full of unknown challenges and dangers, but also opportunities for understanding and trust. The events of the past days had changed the dynamic between them. What had begun as caution and curiosity had grown into a tentative partnership, one that required both courage and patience to sustain. Part 3 ends with the understanding that their journey through the frontier was no longer merely about survival. It had become a shared experience, where trust, respect, and growing understanding formed the foundation of something more profound. The challenges ahead would test that bond, but Marcus and Aelin were beginning to realize that together they could face dangers and uncertainties that neither could handle alone. The rising conflict was not just external, it was also internal, as both learned to navigate the unfamiliar feelings and trust that had begun to grow between them.
The days that followed were tense and filled with anticipation.
Marcus and Aelin had become careful partners, relying on each other in ways they had not expected when they first met.
Yet the frontier was unforgiving, and the deeper they moved into the canyon and surrounding hills, the more they realized that danger was never far away.
The trail of the fugitive had led them into a region known for its harsh terrain and for the lawless men who sometimes hid there, away from settlements and sheriffs.
That morning, the wind was sharp, carrying the scent of rain and dust.
Marcus moved first, testing each step on the narrow path carved into the rock face. His eyes scanned the cliffs above and below, looking for any signs of trouble. Aelin followed closely, her movements light but deliberate. They were both alert, both aware that even the smallest misstep could prove disastrous. Breaths. The silence between them was tense, filled with unspoken communication. Suddenly, a shout echoed through the canyon, a sharp, loud cry that cut through the air. Marcus froze immediately, signaling Aelin to stop. They both crouched low, trying to make themselves as small as possible against the rocky terrain. The sound came again, closer this time, and Marcus realized that it was not the fugitive calling for help. The voice was different, rough, angry, filled with threat. Someone else had entered the canyon, and they were likely armed. Aelin's eyes narrowed. She understood quickly that this was a dangerous situation. The canyon's narrow paths left little room for maneuver, and any encounter could quickly turn deadly. She moved slightly to position herself behind a rock that gave a clear view of the approach while keeping her body hidden. Marcus, calm but alert, readied his rifle and scanned the shadows. They both knew that in moments like this, speed, precision, and intelligence mattered more than bravery alone. From the bend in the path emerged a group of men, clearly outlaws, moving with a sense of purpose and aggression. Their leader, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, spotted Marcus and Aelin almost immediately. He raised his voice, mocking and loud. Perhaps. Well, what do we have here? A couple of lost travelers? Marcus kept his rifle steady but did not fire. He observed their formation, noting the positions of each man, their weapons, and the possible escape routes. Aelin's instincts were sharp. She whispered softly to Marcus, pointing out a narrow ledge that could serve as a defensive advantage. Together they assessed the situation, understanding that any rash action could cost them their lives. The leader of the outlaws laughed, clearly underestimating the pair. "I think we'll take our chances," he said, brandishing his pistol. The rest of the group followed, closing the distance cautiously but confidently. Marcus moved with calm efficiency, guiding Aelin to a position where they could use the rocks for cover. She followed without hesitation, trusting his judgment completely. The tension in the air was nearly unbearable. Then, the outlaws made their move. One of them stepped onto a loose rock, causing it to slide and creating a sudden noise. Marcus reacted instantly, firing a warning shot that ricocheted off the canyon wall. The sharp sound startled the group, forcing them to pause. Aelin seized the moment, moving swiftly along the narrow ledge to block their path. Her actions were precise, showing a deep understanding of both the terrain and human behavior. The leader snarled, realizing they were being countered in ways he had not anticipated.
Marcus kept his aim steady, firing carefully to disable weapons without unnecessary risk.
Aelin continued to move strategically, guiding the outlaws into positions where they were vulnerable but not harmed unnecessarily. Her knowledge of the canyon's twists and turns proved invaluable, and Marcus could not help but admire her skill under pressure. Despite their efforts, the outlaws pressed on, determined to overwhelm them with numbers. Marcus and Island were forced to retreat slightly, moving to a higher ledge where the path narrowed even further. It was a dangerous position, but it gave them the advantage of height and visibility. Marcus whispered instructions to Island, and she responded quickly, moving as one with him in a rhythm that had developed over days of shared experience. The tension reached its peak when the leader of the outlaws tried to flank them, moving along a hidden path that Marcus had not yet seen. Island noticed the movement immediately and shouted a warning. Marcus reacted with lightning speed, intercepting the man before he could reach their position. The confrontation was brief but decisive. Marcus disarmed the outlaw without causing serious injury, and Aylin's presence prevented further surprise attacks. After several intense minutes, the outlaws began to realize that they were outmatched. Marcus's precision, Aylin's knowledge of the land, and their combined strategy made it clear that the attackers had underestimated their opponents. Slowly, the group began to retreat, disappearing back into the canyon's shadows. The threat had passed, but the adrenaline and tension lingered. Marcus lowered his rifle, breathing heavily but keeping his focus. Aylin approached, her expression calm but alert. "That was close," she said, her voice steady. "Too close." Marcus nodded, finally allowing himself a small exhale.
Brit.
Yes, he agreed. But you were remarkable.
"I would not have managed that without you." Island looked away briefly, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. "We managed it together," she said simply. "It was not just me. The storm of events had not only tested their skills but also deepened the bond between them." Marcus realized that his feelings toward Aylin had grown beyond respect and trust. He found himself thinking about her courage, her intelligence, and the way she had stood firm even when danger loomed. Aylin, in turn, felt a growing admiration and connection to the man who had shown both skill and restraint, who had protected her without hesitation, yet respected her abilities.
That night they camped near the canyon's edge, the stars reflecting in the calm river below.
Patient. They did not speak much at first, both still processing the events of the day. Yet there was an unspoken understanding between them, a quiet acknowledgement of what they had survived together. Marcus kept watch for several hours, and Aylin eventually took the first watch, allowing him to rest. In those quiet moments, each felt a sense of companionship that neither had expected to find in the harshness of the frontier. By dawn, Marcus spoke, his voice unusually gentle. "Aylin, there is something I need to say. Today you were more than just a partner. You were brave, clever, and I think I would be lost without you." "Hey." Aylin looked at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his tone. She had grown used to seeing him as calm, reserved, almost untouchable, and now she saw a side that few people ever did. "Marcus." "I feel the same," she admitted quietly. I trust you more than anyone I have ever met." The canyon seemed to hold its breath as they acknowledged the truth that had been growing between them. Their bond was no longer simply practical. It was personal, emotional, and undeniable. Yet both understood that the journey was not over, that dangers remained, and that the choices they made now would define the course of their lives.
As they prepared to continue, they knew that the world beyond the canyon would continue to challenge them.
But something had shifted irreversibly. Marcus and Aylin were no longer simply traveling together. They were connected by experience, trust, and an emerging sense of loyalty and care that neither could ignore. The turning point had arrived. They had faced overwhelming danger, survived, and recognized in each other a strength and partnership that went beyond survival. Part 4 ends with the recognition that the climax of their shared journey had tested not only their skills and courage, but also their hearts. The external danger had brought them closer, and the internal realization of their feelings added a new layer of meaning to their journey. Ahead lay challenges that would demand both their abilities and their trust in one another. But for the first time, they faced the future, not as strangers, not as cautious allies, but as partners bound by mutual respect, shared survival, and emerging affection. The morning sun rose slowly over the canyon, bathing the rocks and river in a soft golden light. Marcus and Aylin packed their small camp quickly but carefully. The events of the past days had left them both exhausted and alert. Yet there was a quiet calm in the air, a sense that the turning point had passed, and that for the first time in a long while, the future felt open, if uncertain. The fugitive they had been tracking had already been taken into custody by the authorities in a nearby settlement. That threat was resolved, but Marcus and Aylin knew that life on the frontier would continue to bring challenges. They also knew that their bond, forged through danger and mutual respect, had changed the path they would take together. The canyon that had once been a place of peril now felt like a threshold, a bridge between the past and a future neither had expected. As they moved along the narrow trails, their conversation was light but meaningful. Marcus, usually quiet and reserved, spoke more freely than he had in years. He shared small details about his life, the lessons he had learned from traveling alone, and the moments that had shaped him. Aylin listened, intrigued by his perspective, and occasionally added stories of her own, lessons from her tribe, memories of family, and the small victories that made life meaningful in the wilderness. The journey was not without challenges. The terrain was rugged, and the weather shifted unpredictably. On one stretch of the trail, a sudden gust of wind nearly caused Marcus to lose his footing. Aylin reached out instinctively, grabbing his arm to steady him. Their eyes met briefly, and in that simple moment both felt the quiet truth of their connection. But it was no longer simply about survival. They were partners in the truest sense, looking out for one another with care and understanding. By midday, they reached a wide plateau overlooking the canyon below. The view was breathtaking. The river carved silver paths through the rocky landscape. The distant hills rolled endlessly toward the horizon, and the sky stretched wide and clear.
Marcus paused, taking a deep breath, and allowed himself a rare moment of reflection.
"It's strange," he said softly, "how danger can bring clarity. I never thought I would feel something like this after all I've seen." Aylin smiled, a quiet warmth in her eyes.
Life has a way of surprising us, she replied.
Sometimes, the people we meet in the worst situations become the ones we trust the most. The bond between them had grown stronger with every challenge they had faced together. It was not just mutual respect that held them together. It was shared experience, understanding, and an unspoken promise that they would look out for one another no matter what the future held. Marcus realized that Aylin's courage and intelligence had changed the way he saw the world, and Aylin recognized that Marcus's restraint and careful judgment had earned her trust in ways few men ever could. That evening, they camped near the riverbank, the water glistening under the last light of day. They built a small fire, and for the first time in days allowed themselves to relax without the immediate pressure of danger. Marcus prepared a simple meal from their supplies, while Aylin gathered firewood and watched the flames dance in the growing darkness. There was a quiet comfort in these small routines, a reminder that life, even in the wilderness, had moments of peace and warmth. As the stars appeared one by one, Aylin spoke first, her voice thoughtful. "Marcus, the world beyond this canyon is changing.
Settlers are moving closer to our lands, and the tribes are facing challenges we cannot ignore.
I cannot stay in one place forever." Marcus nodded, understanding the truth in her words.
I know, he replied, and I cannot stay alone forever, either.
But we have learned to survive together. That is something worth holding on to, no matter where we go. There was a long silence, filled with the sounds of the river and the distant calls of birds settling for the night. Then Aylin moved closer, sitting near the fire. She looked at Marcus directly, her eyes steady. I know the world is uncertain, but I want you to know something. You are my partner now, not just in survival, but in life, Bersha. I trust you, and I want to face what comes next with you by my side. Marcus felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling he had long kept buried beneath years of caution and solitude. And I trust you, Aylin. And I trust you, Aylin. You have taught me more than I could have imagined. Together, I think we can face whatever comes next. The night passed quietly with the fire casting shadows across their faces. But neither spoke much, but both felt a sense of certainty they had not known before. The challenges of the frontier had tested them, but they had emerged stronger, not just as individuals, but as partners. The bond they shared was no longer fragile. It was solid, built on trust, courage, and mutual respect. The following morning, they began to descend from the plateau, moving toward the settlement where the fugitive had been handed over. Path was easier now, the immediate danger behind them, but Marcus and Aylin remained vigilant. The world beyond the canyon was unpredictable, but they were no longer alone. They had each other, and that made the unknown less frightening. As they approached the edge of the settlement, they were met with curious glances from townspeople who had heard of the bounty hunter and the strange circumstances surrounding the fugitive's capture. Marcus ignored the stares, but Aylin noticed the whispers and the cautious smiles. It was a reminder that while their immediate danger had passed, the world outside still held judgment, misunderstanding, and challenges of its own. Inside the settlement, they delivered the fugitive to the authorities, ensuring that justice would be served fairly. The process was straightforward but important, reinforcing the idea that their actions, though unconventional, had been guided by intelligence and restraint rather than recklessness. The officials were respectful, acknowledging Marcus's skill and Aylin's courage without fully understanding the bond that had formed between them. After the formalities were complete, Marcus and Aylin walked outside together, the sun setting in brilliant shades of orange and red across the horizon.
The canyon and plains behind them were a memory, a testament to the trials they had endured and the lessons they had learned.
Ahead lay new paths, new challenges, and the possibility of a life that neither had imagined when they first met. Aylin turned to Marcus, her expression calm but resolute. We cannot stay here long, she said. The land and the people I care about need me. But I want you to come with me, if you will. Not because it is easy, but because we are stronger together. Marcus smiled, feeling a sense of purpose he had not known in years. I will go with you, he said. We have faced danger. We have survived, and we have learned to trust each other. There is no one else I would rather face the future with. Together they prepared to leave the settlement, carrying only what they needed and relying on each other for strength and guidance. The world ahead was uncertain, filled with potential dangers and challenges, but also with the possibility of growth, partnership, and shared life. The trials of the canyon had forged something lasting between them, and they walked forward with confidence and trust.
As the first stars appeared in the evening sky, Marcus and Aylin paused on a hill overlooking the plains, taking in the vastness of the land before them.
The horizon stretched endlessly, a mixture of opportunity and challenge. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace he had rarely experienced. Aylin stood beside him, steady and strong, and together they faced the future with a sense of hope and companionship. The story of the bounty hunter and the Apache woman did not end in the canyon, but it continued in the choices they made, the journeys they undertook, and the life they would build together. What had begun as a chance encounter had grown into a partnership of trust, respect, and shared purpose. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and the unknown, and had emerged stronger together. Part 5 concludes with the understanding that true connection is forged not in comfort but in adversity. Marcus and Island had survived the challenges of the frontier and in doing so had discovered something more valuable than mere survival: companionship, trust, and the beginning of a shared life that neither could have imagined alone.
Their journey was far from over, but together they could face whatever the future held, stronger than they had ever been as individuals.